Hello, everyone, and welcome to International Biz Advantage, Texas and Canada. We are so thrilled to have you with us today for a powerhouse lineup of 4 key leaders who will really dive into the opportunities and what's possible between Texas, Austin specifically, and Canada. So we're looking forward to launch this conversation. Before we do, though, I want to take a moment and say thank you to the Toronto Stock Exchange first and foremost. They've been a partner of ours for a few years now, and we are very fortunate to have them with us. And of course, Alberta Innovates and Laura Kilcrease, who Austinites will know her by name. So thrilled to have Alberta Innovates with us and Laura. And also to our A-list sponsors, which, they help us make all of this possible. So thank you to Visa and Will Coombs, to Deloitte with Emily Rollins, and of course to Delilah, who's on today's panel with the Toronto Stock Exchange. We also have Google and Google Fiber, and then Independence Title and Wells Fargo. Once again, we have Ascension. So this is all phenomenal. And it really is my pleasure to turn this conversation over to a strong colleague and friend of ours, Adriana Cruz, who is the Executive Director of Economic Development and Tourism for the Office of Texas Governor Greg Abbott. So Adriana, thank you for leading this conversation today. It is an honor to highlight you, and we're thrilled to have you with us. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lee. Appreciate the invitation and for the opportunity to moderate this wonderful panel. Thanks for that introduction. I'm honored to be here with you today with what is a phenomenal panel. You all are going to enjoy it so much. I want to thank the Austin Chamber for organizing this event. Today, the International Business Advantage Texas and Canada webinar, we're going to learn about the relationship and the opportunities between Texas and Canada. You're going to hear insights on the robust landscape in Texas and the strong economic and cultural relationship that we have with our neighbor to the north in Canada. So let's meet our panelists. We're going to hear today from the Consul General of Canada, Rachel McCormick, Laura Kilcrease, the CEO of Alberta Innovates, and Delilah Penio, the VP for U.S. Capital Formation from the Toronto Stock Exchange. So let's see our panelists and meet them a little bit more in depth. I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves. And Consul General, I'll start with you.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you to the organizers and Adriana for that kind introduction. It's good to see everyone. So yes, I have the honor to represent the Government of Canada for the South Central United States. And in doing so, promoting business ties, promoting investment, promoting innovation, which I think is a lot of what we're going to talk about today. That's one major pillar of what we do. We have a Trade Commissioner Service, a strong team that's working hard to identify those connections, and we work across Canada to source opportunities in terms of trade connections. In the time of COVID, of course, keeping our supply chains strong and keeping those conversations going. Another part of what we do is helping Canadians, of course, that get into trouble here or need some assistance. And then finally, working with policymakers, decision makers to advance collaboration between Texas and Canada, whether it's governor's offices or regional economic development organizations. And so finding those opportunities. And we're also very lucky to have an honorary consul, Brian Haley, that's located right there in Austin with you. And we have representation from the provinces of Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec here in the Texas region as well. So great panel, looking forward to it.
Thank you so much, Consul General McCormick. Delilah, would you introduce yourself?
Good morning. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. With Toronto Stock Exchange, we have an amazing partnership with the Austin Chamber of Commerce. So I represent Toronto Stock Exchange. I have the honor of doing so, but being based in Los Angeles, and but spending a lot of time, or used to spend a lot of time in Austin as an extraordinary Tech Center and the synergies around the opportunity to raise capital in the Canadian markets for Austin companies, which we'll get into. But yes, it's so happy to be here with these amazing women and representing Toronto Stock Exchange this morning.
Thank you, Delilah. And my good friend, Laura Kilcrease, it's so good to see you. Why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Laura Kilcrease. I'm the CEO of Alberta Innovates. Alberta Innovates is the largest research and innovation organization in the province of Alberta. So we drive innovation technology all the way from the university level, where we spend on research, on basic research, where we've developed leadership in areas like artificial intelligence, through building the ecosystem for small and medium businesses. We touch about 63 to 75% of all the emerging businesses in the province of Alberta through our programs or our support, all the way to having our own labs with about 1.2 million square feet, where we actually solve industry's problems and get real things into the real world. And we very much see the opportunity with Texas. As Adriana knows, prior to my coming to Alberta, I'm also a lifelong Texan, even though I may not sound it, having lived in Austin and still having a home there for the last 30 plus years. So these are my two favorite places, and I'd like us to do more things together.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Laura. And I have a list of questions that I'm going to ask our panelists. We're going to have a conversation talking about opportunities between Texas and Canada, and Austin and Canada. But if you all, as members of our audience, if you've got questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. And as we have time, we'll get to them. But Consul General McCormick, I'm going to start with you. You mentioned trade. And Canada, of course, is one of Texas' largest trading partners. International trade between Canada and Texas plays a significant role in the economic growth for both economies. Can you talk a little bit about that trade relationship?
Sure, absolutely. And, you know, we have $2 billion that goes across our border every day. It's huge. Texas, we are your second largest export market. We're working hard to move up the list, but over $33 billion of goods and services go to Canada. But just bringing that even down to the congressional districts that are connected to Austin, it's over $2 billion that goes to Canada. And we have, our estimates are about 54,000 jobs that are linked to trade just in the Austin area. Linked to trade with Canada. And of course, we have over 600 Canadian-owned businesses right there in the area that are investing because they see the opportunity. And I think Austin is just so clearly known in terms of its driving forces for innovation and bringing people together in a very collaborative way. And so I think that the opportunities in Austin and what's happening in Canada has so much complementarity that we can build on in terms of building that innovation ecosystem and enhancing trade. I know we'll get to talk about the new NAFTA, the US, Canada, Mexico agreement. Depending on where you live, you name it something different. But Canada is also a very, very committed free trading nation. And I know that is something we share with Texas very clearly in terms of the value of trade and what it brings in terms of prosperity for our businesses and our communities. And we now actually have 14 free trade agreements. So I think provides an important gateway for US companies that have subsidiaries or partnerships in Canada with access to over 60% of the world's GDP. All the major markets, essentially 2/3 of the world tariff-free. So I think just from a trading perspective, that provides a really important foundation for opportunity for our businesses.
Excellent. Well, that is exciting, and we are thrilled to have the new trade agreement, USMCA, or is it CAMUS or MCAUS, whichever way. I think you're right, depending on where you live. And several of you talked about innovation at the beginning, and Laura, I want to ask you a question about that. You have such a great deal of experience in Austin and have played such a fundamental role in Austin's transformation as an innovation and a tech center. What opportunities do you believe exist for the movement of firms, capital, and people between Texas and Alberta specifically, but between Texas and Canada?
Yeah, I actually think there's some phenomenal opportunities where we can take the strengths of both areas and actually be very complementary to attack the global market, if I can put it that way. I actually think some of these things are happening now. You know, a lot of these things are not very obvious, but you know, just in Austin, SailPoint has, SolarWinds, excuse me, has purchased 2 Canadian companies from Alberta recently. You've got major other corporations that are partnering with companies here and vice versa. I think one of the things that's challenging, perhaps has been challenging a little bit in Austin, has been the access to even more labor force for the growth of the companies there. And here in Alberta specifically, I'll talk to, and I'll leave the rest of Canada to our great representative, Rachel. But here we have 286,000 students ready to go at the post-secondary, the university, the college level. So the quality of the labor here, the average age of the labor here, the areas of excellence are very also complementary. For example, in Alberta, we have, we're a leader, number 3 in the world in artificial intelligence as for machine learning and reinforced learning. Everyone's going to be using artificial intelligence. So how we can combine that lead with the companies in Austin, but at the same time, the companies in Austin have leads in other areas that can combine with here. So I see not quite a mirror image, but it's the North Pole and the South Pole, if I can put it that way, the 2 magnets coming together where we can actually do an awful lot of business. Now, we think of just technology as artificial intelligence or medicine or wherever. We also think about the labor force that I've discussed, but we also ought to consider our great universities. You know, you have the University of Texas there, Austin, and in other places around Texas, and Texas A&M, and some other great institutions. Similarly, the University of Alberta and the University of Calgary are ranked 5 and 7 in the U15, the nation in Canada, for top research universities. So we have such parallels. I think we have to find ways beyond our traditional trade that people think about, of oil and gas and plastics and even agriculture, cattle, to think about the tech sector. Because the last thing I'd like to say is, because of what our Consul General told you, Rachel, we have some phenomenal accesses to market that may be a little bit more challenged at the moment from you guys in Austin. You know, we are the closest point to China in Edmonton. We're only 6-hour flight for goods, for services, for anything. So our access to Asia is strong and has traditionally been. But it's not just Asia, because we're also part of the old Commonwealth. Our access to the Commonwealth is phenomenal, whether that's Australia or India or any other kind of places. I think that, or the UK, by the way. So I think we have this need to get together and find how we can solve each other's problems business-wise. Adriana?
So that opportunity, thank you. That opportunity for movement of firms, people, and capital. Delilah, you talked about opportunities to raise capital earlier. What's your comment? What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So, you know, obviously, along with the, you know, the flowing of trade, of the creation of jobs, of goods and services, you know, one of the most important things for any business in any area is obviously access to capital. And so what's unique about the value proposition of the Toronto Stock Exchange and our junior market, the TSX Venture Exchange, for companies in Austin, in Texas, and all of the US, is this opportunity to access what we call public venture capital. So what a lot of companies are probably seeing in the US markets, there is, certainly we're in this great robust markets time right now, but it's still difficult for an earlier stage company to access that public capital. And sometimes for a lot of companies, going public is really the way to go for that really needed growth capital. The US used to be a significant growth capital market. It has become more of a exit market. So the IPOs on NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange are quite large compared to what they were even 10, 15 years ago. But what Canada, as the strongest public venture capital marketplace in the world, we have this unique opportunity to be able to access that public capital at an earlier stage. And so I've spent a lot of time, in Austin. In fact, my last roadshow I did pre-COVID was actually in Austin last November, and really speaking to CEOs of, what are all my options to raise capital, and especially for some of the companies that we're talking about on this call that have that nexus to Canada, that already have partnerships with Canadian companies or joint ventures, or were just acquired by, are acquiring Canadian companies. This opportunity to access that capital that will, and the beautiful thing about when you raise public venture capital on TSX is the money comes back to Austin and Texas. So the jobs are created here. So it's not like if a lot of, earlier stage technology companies are looking for that golden ticket of getting venture capital from the Silicon Valley group, but then typically they'll have to move out of Austin for that. And so when the company goes public, all that money, not only does the money come back into the local economy to create those jobs, but all those employees now have stock options and opportunity to capitalize on that company's growth. So, and even also as the citizens of Austin and in Texas, to be able to support those local companies. So when a company goes public earlier, and we all as local people can invest in those companies, we're now participating in the amazing growth story of these, innovative, Austin, Texas companies that if they're only going down the private capital route, then, we're not able to participate in. So there's a lot of really interesting benefits of the public markets that sometimes are forgotten, and that as an economy, we're missing out on when the company goes public a lot later. So I would just encourage, all the companies listening to think about this as an option, because it might be the right source of capital, and also being an ability to contribute to the local economy, and also really increase chances of this trade with Canada. Because of course, once you're listed on TSX or TSX Venture, you'll be even more known within the Canadian business community, as well as the highlighted of being a public company in Austin or in Texas.
And Delilah, as you talk about this as a potential opportunity for some of our Austin companies, do you have some examples of that, or Austin or Texas companies that have utilized that?
We don't have a lot right now, but there are more and more interested, certainly. And certainly there are a lot of, Texas oil and gas companies or energy services companies that are listed in our market, because we have always been a very strong natural resources marketplace. But actually, I have several companies that are interested, some that are starting to announce. And so that will be really exciting for the local business community to really sort of understand this as an option. But I'm working with a lot of great partners like the Austin Chamber to just educate this as a real source of capital for the companies.
That's excellent. That's a great opportunity. And I know, so we have Alberta represented here, as well as the Consul General of Canada overall. And we know Texas is a priority state for Alberta. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of similarities, right? The energy sector, the agriculture sector, and now the technology and innovation sectors. What does this relationship mean for our Austin tech industry and for the Texas tech industry? And I'll pose that question. I'll start with you, Laura, but Consul General and Delilah, I'll ask for your feedback as well.
Well, I think there's a number of opportunities here. First of all, Canada has a slightly different way of doing some of our business at the early stage startups. And we actually here at Alberta Innovates have some what I call non-equity dilutable grants. So we have tax credits for R&D, grants that we give companies and even during the raising equity. One of our companies that we gave a small, we've given 3-4 grants for about $1.5 million to, just raised a $73 million round of capital, partly from the US, partly from Canada. So I think there's some opportunities like that where programs that are unique to Canada can be utilized for these companies that might want to be here or might want to partner first. Second, issues with visas. They've been very fluid issue in the US lately. It's something every country addresses, but Canada is a very multinational culture. and always has been. So there's an ability to have folks come here and be here with legitimate visas that may be a little bit more difficult in the times we live in today. And they could work from here quite easily remotely. I think the other thing is on the capital side, as Delilah said at the later end for the public, but there is an enormous amount of capital. You know, second to Toronto, Alberta is one of the largest capital markets in Canada. And this is a lot of private wealth as well as institutional wealth. So we have the institutional wealth like the AIMCO, the Alberta Investment Management Company with $150 billion, and other like pension funds here that you would have elsewhere. But in addition, we, well, at least in Calgary, we have more billionaires per head of population there than many other parts of the country outside of Toronto and Vancouver. So I think there's a lot of access to capital. We often, of course, say there's never enough, but the truth is I was just looking at the Q2 numbers for Canada, and Canada's still investing its capital at the same rate it was doing pre-COVID. In fact, the numbers are slightly up, both the numbers of companies and the amount being invested. So it's a very lucrative investment market if we have the right partners on both sides of the border. Of course, you in the US have a much larger market than we do here, but we also feel like our markets stretch into those other countries I previously mentioned. So I think the capital is very key for technology and innovation, but I also don't want you all to think that we're just the old oil and gas. Yes, we are a phenomenal oil and gas business between Houston and Canada, or Houston and Alberta. But the level of innovation, the level of connectivity in so many other areas, innovation in ag, innovation in clean tech, innovation in ICT or artificial intelligence, and innovation in medicine is pretty profound. And I think we need to get these linkages going further.
Consul General McCormick, any thoughts on, yeah?
Sure, just I wanted to pick up on some of the themes and thank you all for your comments, and thanks to Laura for shouting out the University of Calgary. I'm an alumna of that great university, and a big fan of Alberta Innovates as well. And I think the programs they have to help companies through those valleys are really, really impressive. You know, some concrete example, we know that there are everywhere from small enterprises to Fortune 500 companies that are establishing R&D centers in Canada, both because of the innovation programs that are happening, the labor force, which a number of folks have mentioned, but also the capital that's available. We estimate that there's, you know, a very cost-effective and skilled labor force that's available, and that's one of the reasons companies are interested. And also, Laura mentioned the visa issue, and so we have something that's called the Global Skills Strategy, really valuing skills-based immigration, investing in essentially, hopefully, you know, as much as 1 million new Canadians. And so with that, companies that are located in Canada can identify work visa opportunities with as low as a 2-week processing time for an intercompany transfer. So I think that's a huge opportunity. Since its introduction, nearly 30,000 people have come to Canada under this strategy, including 24,000 workers in computer programming, information system analysis, and software engineering. And I think there's a lot of complementarity there in terms of some of the things that companies from Austin are looking for. And we have seen that happening quite clearly. Some examples I just pulled up of Austin-based technology companies generating opportunities in Canada include Upland Software and Indeed, who are now located in Canada as well. But then Canadian companies that are seeing that opportunity in Austin, like Mitel and Stantec. And I think, again, that word for me is that complementarity. It's not an either or, it's actually an opportunity in terms of complementarity and synergies that provides great opportunities where you take a little bit from each side and you have the magic recipe, the special sauce to actually drive that innovation, access global markets, and innovate. And Laura mentioned artificial intelligence. So I'll just use the opportunity there to mention Canada's investment in what's called innovation superclusters. So we've picked essentially 6 thematics to develop these technology clusters. And the goal is to work with the private sector to accelerate commercialization, to solve industrial challenges, and also to attract world-class talent. So creating these corridors for each of these themes, working with universities, working with the provinces to make sure we have the skill base, but also the innovation incentives that are regionally and locally available. And one of those superclusters is artificial intelligence. And we also have one on advanced manufacturing and one on digital technologies. And I think all of those are things that are really of interest to Austin-based companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Delilah, any thoughts and comments? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's a reason why, you know, we chose Austin as one of our primary regions to focus our time in, and that even though I'm based in Los Angeles, which, by the way, as a Canadian is a pretty good gig, I find winter to be unnecessary, being from the prairies in Canada. But, you know, we chose Austin because when we looked at the landscape of cities, you know, across the US of where can we have an impact, where is an opportunity for us, and where is an opportunity for the investors that trade on the Canadian markets. And by the way, 40% of our trading on TSX and TSX Venture comes from outside of Canada. So it's US investors, international investors are all coming to TSX and TSX Venture for really extraordinary investment opportunities, especially in the earlier stages and especially in the impact space. So when we looked at Austin as obviously this amazing, you know, center for innovation and entrepreneurial spirit, which is very similar, especially to Alberta. And, you know, we looked at the kinds of companies that are being created in Austin, and we also looked at the current capital realities. So what's interesting about Austin is that there's a very, you know, obviously robust entrepreneurial spirit. There's a very sophisticated angel investor network within, especially for CTAN, the Central Texas Angel Network, great partner of ours as well. And there are amazing, there's so many accelerators and incubators like Capital Factory and all these really, really great organizations, and like the Austin, how involved they are in the entrepreneurial community of Austin. A lot of really great early stage venture capitalists for that critical Series A, but there's not a lot of capital for beyond that. So when you're an Austin company, you've raised your angel investors, you've raised your Series A, and now you're looking for that Series B, so that 10 to 15 million plus. Often Austin companies are having to look outside of Texas. So they're looking to Silicon Valley, looking at New York, and all those VCs are all coming to Austin because they see what's happening there is amazing. And so we looked at it and said, you know, this is a really good opportunity because we really come in at that early stage. We can go public a lot earlier than you think, raising that 10 to 15 million. And again, the opportunity to then have that as an opportunity for investors within the community too. So we just see a natural fit between the capital that we provide, the investors on our marketplace that are looking for early stage innovation, high growth, you know, ahead of the sector's impact. There's a lot of companies in Austin that are really focused on having an impact, and you know, we have a significant role to play in terms of ESG, and you know, we have a lot of leadership in that area. Because investors, retail investors, institutional investors are looking not just for the next great, you know, stock to make money, but they're looking for the ones that have impact. And so as this concept of impact investing grows and grows, there are many of the companies in Austin that fit into that category.
Great. I am going to see if we've got any questions from our audience. We have one. What tips do you have for a Canadian tech company getting set up in Texas? Thank you. So Canadian tech company getting set up in Texas. I have my answer, but Consul General?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned before, we have a great team here that is really available to work with Canadian companies and also to work with American companies that are interested in making connections. And so I have a small but mighty team of 10 people that are really focused on supporting Canadian companies. and promoting those trade linkages. So, just get in touch with us, and then of course, connect to your regional economic development agency to understand sort of what are the incentives that are available, what are the opportunities, what are the groups that you need to be connected to in terms of labor force, et cetera. And I think, getting a handle on sort of the lay of the land there between those organizations will give a good foundation.
And also, as the state economic development organization, by all means, get in touch with the governor's office, with our economic development and tourism team. We do have a team that's focused on foreign direct investment and international trade. And so, contact our office, go through the Austin Chamber. They can give you our contact information. But, we're happy to help Canadian companies get set up in Texas as well.
And Adriana, may I
yes.
just add? I think it's
Yes.
always nicer to get set up in a location where you already know someone, where you feel like there's someone, not just through the programs, but informally. And so there's been a lot. Just also reach out to your networks. You'll be surprised how many connections there really are and how you can link people back and forward. I've been surprised how many of my friends in Austin are actually known to some other folks here, and I never would have known there would have been that connection. And
that's
also,
a great suggestion.
So just a thought.
No, that is great. We do have another question. This is for you, Delilah. As a quick overview, how does a Central Texas company begin the process for a TSX listing?
Perfect. Well, they can certainly reach out to me, and I think our contact information will be provided. But we also have a website for U.S. companies, and it's just us.tsx.com. But I'll just comment quickly in terms of, how do you as a CEO of an Austin company think about if going public is right for me, and how do you weigh this against the other sources of capital that you're currently looking at? And so I would say, I have something called the 4 R's, which are just easier to remember. So, do you have a reason to be a public company? Would you benefit from what happens when you go public? So access to capital, acquisition currency. If you have an acquisition strategy that to acquire companies, if you can use your stock as currency, it's often less expensive than raising money privately for that. Are you ready to be public? So it's a big deal to go public. The benefits are there, but then there's also the reality around audited financial statements and transparency of your company. So making sure that you're ready, and we have a guide to listing that's on our US website you can take a look at. Meeting our listing requirements. So again, we do list very early stage, even pre-revenue companies that if you think about our history of mining and oil and gas exploration companies for 170 years, we're very good at analyzing, assessing early stage companies for the public market. So we have we call right-sized corporate governance. So we don't have for our venture companies as onerous of corporate governance as some of the Sarbanes-Oxley rules, which is a big deterrent for US companies to go public. But we have, again, we are a marketplace that understands small public companies, and this opportunity to list on the venture exchange, do several rounds of capital, graduate to Toronto Stock Exchange, and then ultimately dual list with New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. We know that that's the path that US companies want to be taking, and we're an alternative to the private venture capital route to get there.
Excellent. A couple more questions are coming in. Will any of these businesses need staff augmentation contractors to hire in either the Austin or Greater Texas area? Possibly. And if you are a firm that offers those services, I think stay in contact with the Austin Chamber of Commerce. Economic Development Organization, we work really closely with our community partners, our regional economic development organizations, and try to connect those companies that are coming into resources and service providers in their local area. Okay, Consul General, this was probably a question for you. If you're an American citizen who is interested in living in Canada for a short period, but working in the United States, how complicated is the visa process does that visa exist, and does it have a specific name?
So if I understand the question right, maybe living in Canada but working in the US. And so in that sense, you're not actually taking a work away from a Canadian. And so it would probably, and there's no requirement for a visitor visa for US citizens coming to Canada. If you're interested in working in Canada, there's lots of opportunities in terms of getting visas, and our team can help you there as well. I would say, we're just like everybody, finding new ways to do things in the time of COVID. The border, we have worked really, really hard, and I think it's a testament to the Canada-US relationship that we were able to essentially reduce the movement of people between our countries by about 96% in about a week time frame. But we have tried to keep that open in terms of essential businesses. And so things like energy and the critical supply chains and movement of trucks and goods and services has kept going. But we've also been able to do virtual investment visits. So in the last 6 months, we've actually completed virtual visits to Canada for 10 Austin-based VC funds. So we're finding new ways to ensure that we're creating those conversations and opportunities to keep going. They're, recognizing those limitations. And so hopefully when things open up again, we'll be able to really, have that physical movement where the virtual movement keeps going now.
Great, thank you. Here's another question from an attendee. When I was trying to assist legal and visa assistance in the US, who would be a good resource in Texas for companies that can assist with these services? Consul, I imagine for visa assistance, that would be your office?
For visa, yeah, we can help connect people both directions. So if you're trying to do work here in the US, the visa process is obviously managed on the US side, but we can absolutely connect people, and there are lots of firms that can provide professional services in that regard as well.
And again, for me, the answer to that question, if they're looking to come to Texas, if they're looking to come to Austin, reach out to the Austin Chamber of Commerce. They have a network of firms that assist with legal issues, with visa issues, with accounting issues. So I would definitely, and whether that's in Austin and Dallas, wherever it is in Texas that they're looking to come, there's a network to help provide those services. And then one other question we have, how has ESG played a role in business between Texas, to the Texas, US, and Canada?
Well, I can jump in quick. I think ESG is obviously a big driver, and Delilah probably has a lot of ideas from the investor perspective in terms of how it's driving decisions. And Laura, I think Alberta Innovates is a really big component of the E in terms of the ESG. And so in some of our more traditional sectors, I would say, emissions has been a big factor. And so Canada has some very clear requirements in terms of disclosure, or is increasingly having requirements in terms of disclosure. Canadian companies have, in many ways, been pushed to be very, very transparent. And I could honestly argue that the Canadian energy sector has probably the most transparent emissions system in the world. We have a price on carbon, which is driving innovation further. But there's almost, whether it's a legal requirement, there is a requirement for Canadian energy companies to be very outward in terms of how they engage with communities, and also how they are working to improve their environmental performance. And I think as a result of that, we've seen the results by working with companies like Alberta Innovates, the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance. We've reduced our per barrel emissions by 20% in the last 10 years, and we see another 20% in the next 10 years. But that's been driven a lot by that ESG component. Same thing in terms of engaging with First Nations communities. And so I think there's been a lot of leadership there, and lots of great investments. Like we have with Oxy Ventures, we have a direct air carbon capture program that's going to happen in the Permian, where we're going to be capturing 1 million tons of CO2 to enhance oil recovery here in the Permian. A Canadian company working with a Texas-based oil company, driving economic growth and jobs while, addressing an environmental challenge. So I think there's lots of connections there.
If I can add to what you said from Alberta Innovates perspective, we have actually some of the cleanest oil sands that you would be, probably not fully aware of. Recently as in the last 2 weeks, the Premier of Alberta has announced another $750 million to be spent in this space in the next year or two, as one thing. Second, I'd like to point out that we have the largest carbon capture plant in Canada. And we make this fully available to early stage companies to take that captured carbon and put it into products, such as putting carbon into concrete to give it the strength of steel. And in fact, later this year, in the next month or so, we have all the finalists of the X Prize in carbon capture here, and the winner of that worldwide will be announced here. Half of those finalist candidates are in Canada and half of them are in Montana at the moment. So again, these are not the only things, but we also look at bioremediation. We're one of the largest investors in water in any sense, whether it's from non-pollution, recycling, keep it clean, because Canada has 20% of all the non-oceanic water in the world. So all these things are actually key when we think about environment, not just emissions, water, land, and others. And so we invite any of you folks to talk to us and see again how we can partner in both places to make things better.
And I'll just comment again in terms of on the public markets and really from investor demand, right? So all of our public companies, their investors are looking for transparency in terms of ranking of the ESG, where they fit in. Investors globally are looking for some guidance on how do we invest in the right companies that are leading in this space. And so we have done a tremendous amount of work as a marketplace, as most marketplaces around the world are having to do, to look at how do we help our companies be transparent about how they fit into the ESG, especially globally. And I would agree that our energy sector is really leading that. Those public companies, those big public companies are leading a lot of those efforts. And so, which is what really for this conversation for earlier stage companies or any companies listening is that the reality is this is going to be a component of your job as a company reporting to investors, private investors, public investors. Some of the largest private equity firms in the world have said we will only invest now in companies that are having an impact, and we want to see where they rank in the ESG. And so it's just really important for every company to know that this has got to be part of your strategy. No matter what kind of a company you are, you have to be paying attention to what's happening globally in this area. And then how do you compare yourself? How do you rank? How do you monitor? How do you measure any of these things for your specific industry and be able to report that to your stakeholders, including investors, whether you're private or public?
Thank you. Great. That's great information, and thanks for that question. I have a question. As we've talked about the similarities between Texas and Canada, between Austin and Canada, the development of the Austin technology economy over the past decade or so, VC-backed tech companies, larger companies that have emerged in the VC ecosystem is very similar to that in Canada. Can you expand on that? And can you also talk about the partnership opportunities that may exist to help both the Austin and Canadian tech ecosystem and the Texas and Canadian tech ecosystem? I'll start with you, Consul General.
Oh, sure. Well, I think it's building on a lot of the things we've talked about. I think we have, first of all, let's start from the fact that we have the biggest regional market in the world right now. And with the new USMCA, we now have, over 99% of our goods moving duty-free. We also have the most progressive and modernized trade agreement that exists. We have chapters on the digital economy, which didn't exist before with NAFTA. And so with that, we have an opportunity to ensure we're protecting people's information and IP, et cetera, but really, think about that new economy. Right? It's not just moving boxes and trucking and everything. All of those things are very important, but the way we work together between Canada and Texas is changing. So we have, gaming companies, software companies that have a lot of things happening in Canada and feeding into the workflow and the outcomes and results that are happening here in Texas seamlessly. So I think the way companies organize themselves doesn't necessarily have to be as geographically constrained, where you can, again, seek that complementarity based on options available in this now very liberalized North American market.
Excellent. Laura, you were involved in that tech development in Austin. How do you see this question?
Well, any successful tech development in any particular area needs 4 components: the talent, the people, the technology or the ideas, some capital to get them going and then progress along their growth path, and then what we call know-how or expertise that brings this all together in areas beyond the pure technology. And I think we both have an abundance of all those 4 elements in both places. And we have an abundance, not just in number, but in quality as well. The quality of what we have in the education systems mutually, the access to capital, be it, family, fools and friends, or angels, or a VC, or mezzanine, or, private equity, is in abundance in both of our locations relative to, other areas around the world. So I think one of the things we've got to work on perhaps a little bit more is how do we get these people connected to understand that abundance on both sides of the border? Because it's very complementary in terms of, as the Consul General said, other elements that may affect a firm, such as the supply chains or access to markets. And so I think how we find a way to network these people together, how we come together and share our ideas. And honestly, for an entrepreneur, of which, I am an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur myself, what's the best attribute for the company at the best time in the best location? And if you can pick the best of what you need in this big North American market, this NAFTA 2 or whatever we're calling it, to form the company, grow that company with those attributes, talent, technology, capital, and know-how, and then go out to the rest of the world, we all win. And I think that complementary nature, I think, is really more. We on this line see this so obviously, but not everyone else has that privilege. I think now we're also in a digital world. If we thought we had to go to an office to work before, we've all learned we don't. We can work anywhere, anytime, doing what we need. And let's face it, there's an element of every single company that can digitally be anywhere, and its people at any time doing what it needs. And I think we now have to pick our partners carefully, and this is why this session today is really important.
And I would just ultimately echo that because of the world we're now living in, that there aren't the borders exist, and we're not crossing borders, but they don't exist because we're doing all of our business online. And so, I, having spent a fair amount of time in Austin, obviously being Canadian in all the great cities, being here in California, there's just such an opportunity to expand all of our boundaries, if you will, in terms of who and where to do business. And there is world-class technology in both places. I've seen both. I mean, the incubators, the accelerators that are in Canada that are world-class, that are in Austin. When I was at South by Southwest last year, I was part of this great sort of mission between the City of Toronto coming to Austin and touring, Capital Factory and other places like that, sharing ideas around developing international world-class, innovation companies, and how do we share that? And I know the number of Canadian venture capitalists that are very interested in Austin and Texas companies and the innovation side, and they spend time there too. So just this brilliant opportunity to, everyone's accessible now, right? Everybody is accessible via Zoom, by these sessions. We can do more because we're not traveling. We can talk to actually more people. So I'm just really excited about, where this can all go. And I just invite everybody, from Austin, from Texas, to be thinking beyond their, the city borders, or even the state, or even the country borders, because there's opportunities you just might not be aware of that. Hopefully you're learning about some of them today, in some of the programs that we're all involved in, to have access to, to the best in whatever industry that you're operating in.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions that have come in from our audience members. Are there any specific formal programs which encourage Canadian and US entrepreneurs to work together on R&D or other areas of innovation? Laura, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, from Alberta Innovate's perspective, we don't have a specific Canadian-US program at the moment. We do have with Mexico, we have with China, where we have entrepreneurs and we take them border to border, and we actually help work with them to develop their businesses in both countries. So perhaps this is something we should work on. It's kind of happened naturally over time in itself, but if there's something that Ben thinks we can increase in terms of increase aptitude for this, we're open to any suggestions.
Yeah, and I would just add to that a little bit, in the sense of, like, we have lots of collaboration through agencies, like whether it's Department of Energy in the US and Natural Resources Canada in Canada, or various sort of matchups that happen on specific topics through our labs, through accelerator partnering, those sorts of things. We have some MOUs specific to sectors with universities or different cities. The hard part of those MOUs is you really have to have some people committed to keeping the action going. And so I think, conversations like today are really important, because I think people that are on the ground driving the innovation can identify those opportunities and see if there is a need for that formal framework. But the framework has to have outcomes to keep being, productive, right? And so I'm always a bit hesitant to be too formal, while also ensuring we have a framework and purpose on those R&D partnerships.
Excellent, thank you. And then the final question that we have, I think we have time for one more question. What one piece of advice do you have for women entrepreneurs navigating the clean tech ecosystem and/or the international landscape? And we have a fabulous women, 3 fantastic women panelists to answer this question.
Well, from an Alberta perspective and Canadian perspective, we have in Calgary, CRIN, the Clean Resource Innovation Network, CRIN. This is another mini supercluster, as Rachel mentioned before. It's funded by the federal government to the tune of $100 million. It's just been set up. And that has all the major oil and gas companies, but many other types of companies in there. They've got 1,600 members. Membership is free. It's broken down into 6 technology sub areas. Some of my own team members are leading some of those technology areas, as are other companies. And I think that might be a good place to start, just to get a view on the world of what's going on in the clean resource space. For Alberta specifically, I'd be happy to connect you to the people who run all of our clean tech space. And I said that covers many different areas: water, bioremediation, emissions reduction. That's not just carbon, but methane for any territory that, as Texas and Alberta have in high animal welfare, that's cause a lot of methane production. So there's many different areas of the clean tech space, and be happy to connect you with those folks who could also onward connect you to the number of different organizations that have subspecialities.
Excellent. Delilah?
Yeah, I do a lot of work with women entrepreneurs. And, I would say one thing as a woman entrepreneur, because statistically, we don't get all the capital that goes to our male counterparts especially in the private capital space. So it's really important to know all of your capital options, whether it's crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding, Reg A, venture debt. I mean, just make sure going public, make sure you're really exploring all of your options. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to SheEO, which is founded in Canada by Vicky Saunders, and is a global opportunity to access capital for women entrepreneurs. And they're actually taking applications right now. So it's sheo.world, so SHEEO.world. And specifically, their tagline is women working on the world's to-do list. So when you apply for SheEO funding, you have to identify which of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals you are actually addressing. So if you are in any of the clean tech, clean energy, impact space, then this is a potential opportunity for you to access some early stage capital, and more importantly, tap into a network of thousands of women around the world who are not only investing in you, but are also helping you with your business.
And Adriana, Delilah brought up a very, very good point. There are a number of women-only funds here, as I know there are in Austin, True Wealth in Austin. I certainly would talk to those folks. In Alberta, B51, and some other groups, She Innovates, another United Nation group. But I'd like to point out that we have, in our ecosystem here, 30% of the startups are being led by women, which is the highest in Canada. And not that we're not really good across the country, but I think where we can also mash these women together for mutual help, whether it's capital, knowledge, know-how, or any of the other things we've talked about, we certainly would. I think all of us on this meeting will take that extra step to try and be helpful.
Yeah, and I are really excited to dig into some of the organizations Delilah has been associated with that I haven't been able to connect with yet. I would say Canada was one of the original creators, and now that we have lots of people signed on, we have over 200 companies signed on for an initiative called Equal by 30, which is specific to clean energy. And it's about getting more women involved in the energy sector and the clean energy sector. So given the question was specific to Cleantech. And then I would say, again, our Trade Commissioner Service has actually a specific mandate to help women-owned businesses in terms of their investment and export opportunities. And again, gender being integrated into the USMCA as really a progressive element of that modernized agreement. And so I think this is the time. There's lots of opportunities, and so I think just getting out there and finding out about what the opportunities are is really important.
And I'll just finish by saying, Texas ranks as the top state in the country for women-owned small businesses, in particular Hispanic and African-American owned women businesses in terms of the number of jobs created. So thank you for all of that wonderful information. And we have come to the end of our webinar. I want to thank our panelists, Consul General McCormick, Delilah Panio, and Laura Kilcrease. Thank you so much for joining us today and for providing your knowledge, your expertise. It was really, really informative, and I know a lot of our audience really enjoyed it. I also want to thank the Austin Chamber for organizing this great panel. Thanks to all of you for joining. Please be sure to remember to go vote. And the Chamber has some upcoming events that you should look into. So be sure to follow them and their future events. There we are, State of Talent and Education and a Power Up Tech Talk. But thanks everybody for coming, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.